This is the same old man.
Here's Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious? Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 91 for November 16th, 2014, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Thanks for joining us this week, everyone. We got a fantastic show, but before we get into all of that, I want to introduce this week's guest, and this week we are joined by the awesome Neil Ramjee. Neil, thanks for being on the show this week, man.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, and where can we find you on the internet?
Currently, you can find me at clickreadtype.com or at Neil Ramjee on Twitter. I am a freelance writer and a self-aggrandized movie critic. I love film, computer games, and I also do a little thing called DJing. So, but mainly movies is my bag.
Very nice. Yeah, I definitely follow you on Twitter. I know that we mostly get along with your thoughts on different films, but there are some movies that I feel like I could get into with you big time. I know earlier this year we got into it with Locke. I know you're wrong about that, but we can all forgive you for that.
Dun, dun, dun.
But I would definitely highly recommend checking out Neil's stuff. It's very good stuff. He's a great follow. Definitely go check it out. And again, thanks for joining us this week. On the show for this week, I'm pretty excited. We're going to be talking about Jon Stewarts' directorial debut in Rosewater. And going off of that, we're going to be discussing our top 3 interrogation scenes in film, which should be pretty interesting. I have about 65 choices, so I have to narrow that down to 3 by the time we get there.
Geez, that's it?
That's it. And for our discussion segment this week, we're going to be doing a new segment called This or That, and we'll get into more details about that later on in the show. But before we get going into all of it, I'll toss it to you first, Neil. How was your guys' week?
It's been pretty good. I managed to see a few movies, some that I'm not sure are out over in the States yet, including The Imitation Game with the ever wonderful Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah. Looking forward to that one.
Well, it's certainly an interesting film, and we'll leave it at that. And I've got a few others scheduled for next week as well. So the impending Hunger Games third film. And also, I'm finally getting to see The Drop, which hasn't dropped here in a long while. But it's finally in our local cinema, and I'm able to go and see it.
Yeah, that's one that we discussed a few months ago. I think we got that in early September.
Yeah, I don't think I was on that show.
No, you were not on that show, but I really like Tom Hardy. I like anything Tom Hardy, so I'm a little biased towards that. Cool.
That makes you a bad movie critic.
No, I discussed plenty of the issues I had with that film.
Yeah, I'm
How was your week, Brendan?
Well, if everyone can tell by my voice,
at first I thought it was Blake in Brendan's body.
That's a really creepy way to think about that. But I had a really good weekend. Let's just say that. As most people know, I'm moving to Nashville pretty soon, so I'm kind of getting focused on the final move, getting ready to come up. Only in a couple days, so you were involved in my going away dinner on Friday a couple days ago, and then I went out again last night with a couple friends. Had a bit of a bros night with some of my dudes, and broke out the cigars, the bourbon, and let's just say I got back at 4 a.m, not as much sleep, and that's why I sound like Blake right now.
Yeah, for those that have seen Big Hero 6, Brendan was on a low battery all weekend long.
That's right.
But I'm excited for you to be in studio with me last time before you moved to Nashville.
Precisely.
But we'll have you back on the show. It'll still continue, so I'm excited for that.
I look forward to that.
My week was pretty awesome as well. For those that listen to the True Romance podcast, I gotta toss this out there before we get going into it. I threw a bet out there with them last week regarding the Detroit Lions and the Miami Dolphins football game, and of course my Lions won. And so if you go listen to their show this week, Hyro had to give his top 10 genuine, authentic, best compliments about the Transformers franchise, the Bayformers, if you will, and it was quite entertaining. I would highly recommend it. So I would recommend their show anyway, but especially this week, definitely go check it out. And also, real quick, I'll just plug our latest extra film as well, where Brendan and I discussed Whiplash, which is one of our favorite films of the year. And speaking of Big Hero 6, we also discussed that on the show as well. So it was one of my favorite extra film podcasts we've recorded.
It was a very long one, too.
It was a little long.
Was that our
good.
longest one?
I don't know on the numbers, but it was close. It's very close.
That was a good epic discussion on Whiplash, but it was so
awesome.
deserved. It was so warranted.
Yeah, very good stuff. So, all right. I'm excited, though, to talk about Rosewater, so let's get into it.
And here we go.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 91. Brendan, can you tell me why an American pretending to be a spy would interview you?
JD, a spy wouldn't have a TV show, damn it.
Sir, you're making a big mistake. I am a journalist. That's it. Nothing more.
Just a journalist.
Yes.
As a spy, I'm just trying to figure out why your country is so terrifying.
The first thing to know about Iran is that it is not evil. Americans and Iranians have a lot of things in common more than they have differences.
What do I have in common with you?
So can you tell me why just journalists meet up with this American spy on the eve of the interest?
He's not a spy.
He's not a spy?
No, it's a show.
It's a show?
A comedy show. It's stupid.
It's very stupid, yes.
He's a comedian pretending to be a spy.
So can you tell me why American pretended to be a spy had chosen to interview you?
And why would a real spy have a TV show?
All right, Rosewater is directed by Jon Stewart and stars Gael Garcia Bernal, Kim Bodnia, and a bunch of other people that we'll get into. Neil, I'll toss it to you first, man. What did you think about Rosewater?
I thought it was an absolutely bold effort from Jon Stewart as his directorial debut. It's certainly something that would play into his hands being a satirist on American television.
Sure.
And I think that you know, to jump into his first film, that subject matter would be the most easiest of things for him to take on.
Sure.
I really enjoyed the sense of the toing and froing between the central character Maziar Bahari and Rosewater all the way through, and I thought that the play between the two of them were absolutely essential for them to convey the story and make it move on. And I thought there were lots of faults within the film itself, but for a debut, I thought, yeah, this is good, and this is what Stewart is good at. He is good at this political, well, essentially political tales that he tells through the medium of comic, but also, you know, this is based on real life.
Yeah.
You've got to, you know, this is based on a book by Maziar Bahari and his memoirs whilst he was incarcerated in Iran.
What about you, Brendan?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the exact same boat. The first thing I was going to talk about, but you kind of stole my thunder, is that about halfway through this movie, I started thinking, no wonder this is definitely a Jon Stewart story right here.
Yeah.
No wonder. And one of the big things I love most about it is you know, it's essentially a subject matter that he himself has always been involved in, especially that he personally does himself too, which is essentially, you know, presenting the accurate news, but in kind of a satirical way sometimes. But the whole movie isn't satirical. What I like about the movie is that he does a really good job balancing humor, but serious thrills and a really serious story underneath here too. I mean, there are a lot of times where the central character, Maziar Bahari, like, you actually feel really bad for him. Then the next scene after, it's like you find yourself laughing. And we can get into like some of the specific scenes and into why. Sure. But the balance of the humor and the drama here was quite good. And it's a perfect story, a perfect real life story that I definitely am not surprised to see Jon Stewart's name directed at. And for a directorial debut, I really have to give him a lot of credit because it's a very ambitious work. And even from a directorial standpoint, from a filmmaking mindset, it's very ambitious. He does some pretty neat things here. There's a neat sequence when you see like all these hashtags and Twitter like hashtags that kind of show up in the same way we saw in the movie Chef. That's the first thing I thought about, and how they kind of build around the entire city here in Iran. I thought there were some neat little touches there, just from from an art direction, I guess, kind of standpoint. I do think sometimes it is a little overly ambitious. I think he sometimes trips over his own ambitions sometimes. But for the most part, I was with this movie, and I thought it was a really interesting take in how he uses what we know and love from Jon Stewart with that, accurate but satirical presentation of the news and the media and real life events that are going on the globe right now. But he brings that what we know and love from him. He brings that to this movie in a really interesting way, and just from that aspect alone, it's worth seeing because it is so interestingly done.
Yeah, I'll agree with you guys. I really enjoyed this film as well, and you guys are spot on when you're talking about how this political kind of drama is definitely his realm. It's right up his alley, and something that is pretty passionate to him if you watch his show. And especially it's going to tie in, if you know the real life story of this guy, into his show directly.
Sure.
There was an incident where one of his correspondents interviewed this guy. They played it on their show, and then a few days later, he's arrested and in prison. And I can only imagine what that was like in his own head when he heard that for the first time. Like, I'm sure they felt terrible. And he's even gone on the show talking about that as well when he's been interviewed back on the Daily Show and whatnot. But I completely agree with you guys. I do think it's pretty interestingly well told. I do have some issues with it as well, as you guys were talking about, but it was still pretty compelling. And ultimately, it's a really neat story about the triumph of the human spirit, which we'll get into more. But as far as Jon Stewart and his direction here, I thought mostly it was really good. There were some really nice sequences, as you were talking about, Brendan, visually that he brings to life really well. And I love that he brought the connection of his show into the film. I felt like it would have been so easy for him to kind of pass over that or just mention it.
Sure.
But I love the reenactment with Jason Jones. I thought that was really fun. Added a nice little dynamic to it. And it kind of goes with the humor that you were talking about. He does blend humor in with the drama, I think, in a way that feels very much Jon Stewart. It was never too much. It was a nice little blend. My biggest issue with the film, and I'll say this and then I'll toss it back to you, Neil, if you want to jump on this, but for me, it was mostly some pacing issues. I feel like the pace of the film, and I know that when you're talking about 120 days, that you're going to have to figure out a pace that feels right for the film. But I do feel like the way that Jon Stewart approached that did kind of soften some of the visceral impact. At least it did for me. I never really fully felt the kind of torture that this guy probably experienced in real life, and I'll discuss more about that here in a second. But to me, it just felt like he was an excited puppy that was getting ready to play, and he was a little too anxious, I think. And the editing of the film, while fun and creative, I think plays a big part in that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But I felt like he should have slowed down and spent some more time on a few different things throughout the film to make it a little bit more visceral, especially when we're exploring his torment. And I think the film would have hit a little harder, at least for me. But overall, I say that, and I still really enjoyed the film quite a bit.
I mean, it's quite interesting that you mentioned the pacing. At the beginning of the film, there's obviously this huge exposition, who's Maziar Bahari, what does he do? He's going backwards and forwards, he's got a pregnant wife, and all this backstory to him, and then all of a sudden you're shut down. As soon as he's incarcerated, you're in these four walls, there's not much change to the scenery, and I feel that the situation itself doesn't lend itself to give that pacing. There are these grey walls that he's staring at and the same faces every single day. The cast doesn't particularly change. It's just the two of them for the majority of that middle section of the film.
Sure.
And in a way, if you want to think that Jon Stewart's being clever, maybe it's deliberate. Maybe he is deliberately pulling down the pacing to make you feel like what it's like to be incarcerated.
Sure.
However, I don't think he has that.
Yeah.
As smart as the man is, I don't think it's a deliberate thing. I think it's a real issue with the film itself.
Sure.
Is that you are stuck in prison essentially for the bulk of it in the center. I think it's interesting you said you didn't feel that the torture experienced by Maziar. I did, but it was lessened because Jon kept on feeling the need to put in these slightly absurdist, farcical, comical moments, and that sort of detracted from the horror, the true horror of some of these acts that were being committed. And it was almost like a reassurance for the audience. Let's put this little funny thing in there so they can laugh, and it'll give it a bit of levity, and everyone can just be distracted away from the real issue, which is the incarceration and torture of essentially an innocent man. And I just, it's very difficult. Brandon, it was interesting to hear you talk about the Twitter and the floating thoughts. But the problem I have with that, and I'm going to sound so mean now, is going to date a film incredibly. We're going to look back at this in maybe 5-6 years' time, and we'll see, the little birds in Chef and these Twitter thoughts out on the thing, and we're going to look back and go, wow, that's really dated that film at that time. And do you know what? It may not be a bad thing for this film because it was set at a certain time. And how relevant Twitter was at that time. But for things like Chef, no, it's going to that's an everyman story. Could be told any year. That's going to ruin that film. For this one, I would probably give it a bit of a buy on that one, and say, yeah, okay, it's relevant to the timescale. The floating thoughts I thought was perhaps a little bit college student sort of filmmaking. When they can't, well, obviously Maziar couldn't express his thoughts. Very similar to in the way that I guess Locke played out its thoughts with its central character, was bringing in a deceased or an imagined person to have these conversations, so you could get a sense of what was going through the central character's mind. And I thought those were very interesting things, but I really, really struggled with some of the cinematography in here. It was beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it just felt like some of the time it was for the sake of it, to give it some, marks with the critics.
Yeah, and I think that's where my biggest problem was, where I say the movie was a bit over-ambitious sometimes, because I felt like, being Jon Stewart's first directorial debut, I think he did get a little excited in the filmmaking aspect of it. And I think really my biggest criticism, kind of going along with what you were saying, JD, about how the film's pacing kind of distracted you from parts of the movie. It wasn't really so much the pacing for me, but in many ways, I guess you can argue that it was that a lot of this, a lot of it was very kind of kinetic. It was very energetic sometimes, especially. And then I realized, the movie is, I think it's like 103 minutes, I think is what the movie was. So it's under 2 hours. It's a pretty short movie. But I think that's also part of the problem, was that I think we needed more moments of tranquility and getting to care about these characters. I felt like that was really my biggest issue, was that there was so much going on from a filmmaking standpoint that it kind of started to distract me from really caring about the heart of the story. So I guess it's not a huge deal, because I think by the time we get to the film's climax, I was more with it. But for about like the first half, or even like 2/3 of the movie, I didn't really feel that connection between him and his mother, or his British girlfriend. I didn't quite feel that as much as, and I think that's definitely a common thing with a first time director. They get kind of excited, they want to try and flood the screen with some neat little directorial tricks that they kind of lose sight of the heart sometimes. It's not hugely prevalent though, but I think for the most part, at least in the film's first half, I wasn't quite with it emotionally, but I was still engaged by the story because it's a fascinating story. A lot of those ambitious traits of filmmaking, like the Twitter crawls that I was talking about, I think were really neat to look at, and it kept me interested. It just detracted me from the heart of what the movie was. Another thing I want to comment on what you were saying, Neil, is that it is very true that something like that could make the film seem kind of dated, but I do think for the time here, because it is kind of representing a point in time, that I was okay with it. But a lot of times I am kind of in agreement when you do something like that, it does date certain aspects of a movie, and usually that does kind of annoy me. It's like when a movie opens with some kind of flashback flashback, and then when the movie opens with the next scene, it says present day. That's something I can't stand, because then when you watch the movie 50 years from now, it's no longer present day. It's,
Sure.
We can pretend though.
yeah, but the thing is, it just doesn't work out that way. It's like, and it's so similar things like that can annoy me, but in this case, it was fine for me because it was about a specific moment in time.
Well, I think the film is kind of tricky in the sense that you're exploring this character and his story, but it's over a long period of time. So there's a lot to explore here, because you have to get to know the characters. You have to know the situation. You have to know the danger. And then there's 120 days that he's in prison. So I can kind of forgive Stewart, because I think for the most part, he does a good job. I didn't mind the flashback, and the structure of the film I thought was fine.
I didn't mind that either.
I just, for me, it was mostly just the pacing, but there is a lot to explore here. And it's not as crisp as it could have been. Absolutely. The editing could have been a little bit different, but I think for the most part he does a good job, given how difficult really I think this telling this kind of story is. And I guess to kind of touch on what you guys are talking about with the Twitter aspects, I'm perfectly okay with it. I can understand and even really buy what you guys are saying for the most part, but I think in this instance, when you're talking about this kind of political story and this time, Twitter and the internet and blogging had a lot to do with this guy's story in this specific time.
Precisely.
So I think even 50 years from now, to look back on this film and not have that stuff in there doesn't do this story service.
Right.
You have to have it in there. So for me, I was perfectly okay with that, although I do understand what you guys are talking about. One thing I do want to get to real fast is, I did kind of mention that a lot of the pacing of this film did kind of soften the visceral impact for me. But that being said, while I do think it could have been handled better, I do think that when we get some really nice intimate moments with the Bahari character, played pretty great by Gael Garcia Bernal, there are some really interesting moments where he kind of is by himself and he's kind of having to find it within him to get through this really difficult situation. And I'm kind of torn on that, because what I meant by it wasn't as hard for me is it didn't feel like to me he was really beaten a whole lot. I mean, he may have had some crummy food, and I don't know the details of all this. All I know is what was presented in front of me, but it didn't look like the guy's time there was incredibly difficult based off of what I saw from this film, other than they were trying to trick him in certain instances. And that's, I guess, all I'll say without giving spoilers away. But that being said, when we get some intimate moments and he's trying to overcome just being in solitary confinement, that in itself is going to be pretty arduous. I do think we get some really great moments there, and him having to think about other people in his life, different elements that got him through this situation. I thought that was fantastic, and it really culminates for me in a few different scenes, but one I want to mention real fast is there's a scene where he's blindfolded and he goes outside and he can feel the sun for first time in probably months at this point.
Sticks his hand up like that.
He can feel the warmth that he hasn't felt in a while, and I think it gave him a pretty warm feeling in a couple different ways. I mean, obviously there's the physical aspect, but I think it gave him hope at that point, and it was kind of heartbreaking because psychologically and internally this is a guy that's been broken down a little bit, and that part I did grab onto. And that scene I thought kind of crystallized that character in a really fantastic way.
I agree, and that was part of the heart that I was really kind of hoping to get more out of the film from. That's a great scene. In fact, I think that's probably my favorite scene in the movie. I was going to talk about that. You just stole my thunder there, but that really is a fantastic scene. I agree with you 110%.
All right, well, for the sake of time, we have to move on a little bit. So, Neil, any other final thoughts you want to say about Rosewater, and what grade would you give it?
I do want to raise the point of, what do you guys think of a Mexican playing an Iranian, and did that distract you?
It didn't distract me at all, because Gael Garcia, he was fantastic in this role. He made a complete transformation. I thought, at least noticing between him and the supporting cast in this culture, I thought he was able to throw his voice pretty well and actually match up with the dialect of the Iranian culture. And I thought he did a very good job. I've always liked this guy. I thought he's been fantastic in all the other works that I've seen him in. JD, we were talking a little bit about Y Tu Mama Tambien, fantastic in that movie. And then he was in the Motorcycle Diaries as well, right, where he played Che Guevara, I think. And I think that was on Netflix. I watched that when it first came out, and that's also another fantastic role, another fantastic movie. And I'd like to see this actor get more commercial work, I guess you can say. But I thought from that kind of physical standpoint, it was a very good performance.
I thought it was fine too. Yeah.
It's quite interesting because I'm obviously not used to that many Hispanics around in this part of the world. But I could slightly pick up his accent in there, and it sort of I found it a little bit abrasive. But then again, perhaps I've got it into my head that is Gael Garcia Bernal, and he is that dude.
It could be that, but maybe it's just like, I guess the American mindset that we have a harder time picking up those kind of distinct dialects from other cultures because we have our own kind of unique blend of dialects in the United States that we're more used to understanding and kind of differentiating, I guess. So it might be a bit harder for us to pinpoint that. But for me, I didn't notice it. I thought it was a pretty good portrayal.
Okay, and there were some interesting things, not spoilery things, but there were some interesting things in terms of Jon Stewart trying to bring in his pop culture references. So we had the porno DVDs, which turned out to be The Sopranos, and then there was a Pasolini DVD in there as well, which was, I think the fact that he mentioned Pasolini was kind of important, but I didn't delve into it too deeply. And then there's obviously the Empire magazine with Megan Fox on the cover. And all the other bits, and I think for me personally, like I said earlier, this levity, these outreaches to popular culture, sort of, blunted the edge of some of these torture scenes. And as you said, JD, this guy didn't have as rough a time as perhaps we were anticipating initially. Shall we say? I mean, North Korea are going to watch this and they're not going to be quaking in their boots over Iran's torture methods. So I think the part of it was these culture references sort of took me out the moment, and it wasn't as gritty as it could have been. I felt that there were times where Stewart was obviously trying to show this story, in quite a concise time. The 3 minutes was it? And while he was trying to, move it along, I just felt that, wow, he glossed over many parts. There are the rioting on the streets and the fallout from that could have been a little bit more, to the bone. The visceral element you were talking about, I would have liked to have seen that more, to have this sort of feeling that he was being oppressed, and this was an important thing, and that didn't come across as strongly as I felt it could have done. I felt that in parts that the storytelling was a little bit vanilla, and we had this character of Rosewater there as this overbearing sort of, I guess, almost like a father figure to an extent, if you think about it. And even Rosewater had these great sort of schizophrenic turns in his personality, where one minute he wants to, interrogate, torture, get as much information out, and maybe even take him out to do horrible things to him in the yard, and then the next minute he's offering him a Nescafe, and it sometimes it worked because the worst thing that you can do, and I'm sure we'll talk about this maybe a bit later on in terms of interrogation, is when an oppressor or an interrogator suddenly takes something away from you or distracts you with something completely abstract, something out of the way, and you think, whoa, we're safe for a moment, and then bang, they're back on us again. So things in terms of that kind of were interesting. And I think that there's a part with the coda, and once again, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a reference to satellite dishes, in the final part, there is this almost clumsy moment where we see a sequence with these satellite dishes and local people, and I really felt that was, while pertinent to the story, I felt it was it didn't keep in kilter with the rest of the film, should I say, tonally.
Yeah, and I think those are all good points, and I think what I agree with all that there, which I feel like the theme of what you're kind of coming to there, Neil, is that Jon Stewart's throwing a lot of stuff here that I feel that like when you got a lot of those other references, especially pop culture references, that I feel like he probably felt like he needed to put in there. That a lot of times it almost kind of felt like 10 pounds of crap into a 5-pound bag, and I think I made that reference on another review. I forget
last week with Interstellar.
Yeah, which is exactly true with that movie, but I feel like it's kind of the case here. here. Maybe not quite so much, but it is still kind of there. I do think that pop culture scene in the beginning of the movie where they're going through like the Sopranos DVDs and saying, "What is this, porn?" And I think it was pretty funny. And then he whips out the magazine with Megan Fox.
Yeah.
He's like, "What is this?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's probably porn." I do think I love those touches.
It was at least funny.
Oh yeah, see, and I love.
Yeah.
I think what I appreciate most about that were those light touches of humor throughout the movie and how it was able to blend with the visceral, not really visceral, but with the drama of the movie. I think the blend was quite there. Maybe we didn't quite get enough of the visceral drama that I was kind of hoping for, but at the same time, it does kind of feel like he's just throwing those pop references there just for the sake of putting him there because we know he's good at that. We know he likes to do that. So it almost kind of felt like maybe he thought it was a necessity when he probably didn't have to do that. But it's a first time directing job. He's going to go with what he knows and what he's good at. But maybe he'll expand upon that. Maybe it will, because I think this is a very good directorial debut. I think this definitely shows that Jon Stewart could potentially have a decent career as a film director. Maybe he can just start experimenting a bit more, maybe even tell some different stories, but he's got a very good eye for the camera. He really does.
All right, well, before we get into your grade, Brendan, Neil, what grade would you give Rosewater?
I'd give it a solid B.
Okay. Well, anything you want to add to what you just said then, Brendan?
No, that I basically just said my piece there, but I would agree. I would give this probably a B, maybe more like a B+, because there was a lot of stuff with Stewart's ambition that I really had a lot of appreciation for.
Yeah.
So just from that alone, I was never bored with this movie, even though I wasn't exactly moved by it. I think there was a lot going on here that I appreciated from a filmmaking standpoint, and it's a very important story worth telling. And I think I think it's one that will be, even though we talk about social media and Twitter, and it could make the movie seem kind of dated quite a few years down the road, depending on how social media changes. I don't know how that's going to be, but I think it makes a good, valid, timeless argument that no matter how it advances, I think it's still going to be relevant for for many points in time after this, and I have to give it credit for that too.
Yeah, I will pretty much agree with a lot of what you just said, and I agree that the story here is pretty compelling, and it's very important, and it's a bit unnerving too. I mean, this guy is being thrown in jail for being a spy, which is a pretty heavy thing to happen to someone, especially when you're not aware of what's going on when it's happening at first. And I thought all of that was kind of interesting, and I also think another thing that plays into that was kind of compelling is that from the Iranian side of things, and obviously the film does showcase how much they hate American and Western culture and really just how paranoid they are a little bit. I mean, it's kind of absurd that someone would think this, but I think they do a pretty good job of giving us the Iranian perspective of, to them, it's not absurd. Like, that's just what they're thinking about all the time. And then when we see that from the Bahari perspective and him, I mean, he does laugh at that idea when he's first told that. And so I thought the exploration of that, it was pretty interesting. Now, I wish it would have gone a little bit deeper and darker, and maybe the guy's life in prison just wasn't that difficult. I mean, maybe it was just them trying to break him down psychologically, I guess. And they do explore that here in a pretty interesting way, but I don't know. I just wish it was a little bit more visceral. But I will say, thematically, I do like that the film talks a lot about hope and how powerful of a weapon that is when it's not broken. And like I said, it's kind of the human triumph of overcoming these kind of tough obstacles, especially internally. And that idea also crystallized really beautifully near the end when he's able to, I'll just say, call someone of importance. I thought was really great, and I thought that scene was handled really well. And even with where the character goes with the scene right after that, was really well handled too. I thought that was really great. And another thing I want to talk about real fast before I give my grade too, and we didn't really touch on him a whole lot, is Kim Bodnia, the guy that actually plays Rosewater. I think is excellent here, and I think he gives a pretty good performance. And although the character, some of it in the way that it's written is kind of strange. Like his distraction with impurity, I'll just say, is kind of interesting. I mean, there's a scene about three quarters of the way through this movie that it was comedically funny, but I agree with Neil that tonally it doesn't make sense.
I agree,
to throw in there, and it is kind of distracting in the overall grand scheme of things. And I think that's one of those things that, as a director, you'll look back on this going, oh, maybe that wasn't a good idea. But it was funny, I'll say. But I did think that he played the Rosewater character really well. I thought that was really great. But overall, despite some of the issues I have with this, I thought it was a really solid film. I think he told the story of hope and honesty in a really interesting way. Like you said, Brendan, I was never bored. I had a pretty good time with this too. I would give it a B. And the last thing I'll say is it's not my favorite, but I enjoyed Howard Shore's score for this film too.
I was very surprised that was him as well, and I think it just goes to show that Howard Shore is a very diverse composer. Because he has a lot of interesting work. Most people know him for Lord of the Rings and now the Hobbit films and for that really epic dramatic score. But he's also done the music for like The Departed I think he also did for The Silence of the Lambs. I'm not sure, but he's done a lot of different work. He's very diverse, and you gotta like him. Yeah.
Anyway, if you want to check out more thoughts that we have on this, go to our Letterboxd page at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm.
And if you agree or disagree with our takes on Jon Stewart's Rosewater, you can let us know by leaving us a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/InSessionFilm, or you can tweet us at InSessionFilm. And you can also leave us a comment on our Google Plus page, or you can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com.
All right, the InSession Film Top 3 is next, and we're going to be discussing our top 3 movie interrogation scenes.
And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, Brendan, so we just got done reviewing Rosewater, and just like Rosewater, if you listen to the first-time watchers, guys, sometimes it is like torture. I'm just kidding. I love these guys. Except when they talk about Transformers.
Then it's always torture. But for me, it's always torture listening to I'm totally kidding. We love these guys. They're a great supporter of our show. And they're definitely a podcast everyone out there needs to check out. It's hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano. They know their movies. They have great chemistry together. You got to check these guys out, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Their banter is amazing. It's very entertaining, much like good parts of Rosewater.
Yeah.
It's very good. Very funny.
Yes. The more satirical parts, yes.
Yes.
But what is unique about them is that every week they'll pick a movie that none of them have seen, so they're able to get like a really fresh discussion off of that. And they'll also talk about movies and other trailer news that they've seen recently, so it's very fresh and very kind of recent, and it just feels very good that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and they do a fantastic job. They also do movie recommendations at the end of the show, which is really fantastic. The show overall is just really fluid. It's easy to listen to. You can tell they just have a lot of fun when recording. And it's amazing.
Yeah,
so,
and it's fun guesting on them, too. I've done that twice already. It's great talking with those guys. It really is.
So that being said, where can you find these guys on the internet, Brendan?
There are a couple ways. You can go and check them out at firsttimewatchers.blogspot.com. You can also hit them up on Twitter. It's First Time Watchers. And also just search for them on Facebook, First Time Watchers, and you'll find them right away.
Yeah, absolutely. Go subscribe to them on iTunes. Leave them a review. Or subscribe to them wherever they are. You definitely go check them out. We promise it'll be absolutely worth your time.
And not torturous.
And it's not torturous, I promise. We were just joking about that.
We love you, Tim.
Yeah. Again, that's First Time Watchers. You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 91, and now we're going to be going over our top 3 movie interrogation scenes. Before we get into it, though, Neil, did you have any criteria that you looked at to pick your list this week?
I was actually going to go for all the funny interrogation scenes, because there's quite a few funny interrogation scenes out there in the movie world.
Yes.
But I think I went for a couple of horrendous ones, a really obvious one, and one that made my VCR wear out.
Nice.
Good.
That's not a bad thing at all. What about you, Brendan?
I didn't focus on anything specific. If I looked at funny ones or serious ones or thrilling ones, that didn't really matter to me. But I just wanted to focus on as simple as possible, at least 2 people sitting down and questions are asked to get somewhere in some advancement of the plot. And then I wanted to focus on a character that uses some method that is just so intriguing, but so either so thrilling, funny, or whatever it might be to get their answers, to try and advance where the story is going to go. I wanted to look at ones that really kind of thrilled me more than anything else.
Yeah, I'm pretty much right in the same boat as you guys, except I didn't really look at comedies, and mostly because I was trying to keep in what I thought was going to be a pretty serious film in Rosewater.
Sure.
Even though it was Jon Stewart, I knew there was going to be some comedic parts. I thought it was going to be more visceral than what it was, I guess. But for the sake of that, I tried to keep it to more serious. Some of mine are probably predictable. One of them I picked just because I want to get a response out of somebody, and we'll talk about that later.
I know what your one's going to be.
So that's where I went. But I also wanted it to be pivotal for either the film or the character that is in the scene. So that's kind of where I looked at with mine. Neil, what is your number 3?
Number 3 is Basic Instinct.
Nice.
1992. So Sharon Stone's character is accused of murder, and there's a moment where you have to hit the pause button pretty quick.
Yep. Which I think I read online that is the most paused moment of any film ever.
Oh man, Sharon Stone would be.
It certainly was instrumental of the destruction of my Basic Instinct VHS. So yes,
Nice.
Basic Instinct, and that is one of my teenage moments of interrogation.
Very nice.
It's all like one of the teenage moments of puberty.
Every male on the planet has probably seen this movie.
I think for that reason, I think that's helped them shape of how the men that they became afterwards.
Yeah, crazy. All right, Brendan, what do you got at number 3?
So my number 3, I didn't want to include this movie because, and I've already got on record telling you, JD, I'm not a huge fan of this movie. But this movie opens with an interrogation scene that is one of the best I've ever seen, and I think it's probably one of the best scenes that this director has ever done. And it is the opening chapter of Inglourious Basterds. Between Colonel Hans Landa, played by Christoph Waltz, and the Frenchman, when he's trying to find Shoshana and her family.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, I'm not a huge fan of this movie. I think there's a part towards the last third of this movie that really goes downhill for me. But up until that point, this movie was fantastic. But this opening scene, the blend of humor and fright, and the establishment of this character as one of the greatest movie antagonists in our recent years, I think, was just pitch perfect. I'll even take that back. I really think that this is my favorite Tarantino scene of all time. Is the opening of this movie. It is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean it's a solid scene, and the writing there and the acting is incredible.
May I smoke my pipe as well? He whips out this huge pipe. I love the humor blend there. It's great.
Intense. Yeah, it's phenomenal stuff. Well, going from your favorite Tarantino scene, I'm going to talk about my favorite Tarantino scene for my number 3.
Is it the one we set up?
It is Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
This one is also pretty funny, but I do think it's also serious in tone. And obviously, if you've seen the film, it's pretty pivotal for this storyline and these characters. But for me, this is just immaculate writing by Tarantino. And I think this is Samuel L. Jackson's best acting. I think this is his best scene. I don't think he has ever topped this in his entire career, at least for me personally.
I could see that. That.
I feel like a lot of other roles he's done since then has been trying to mimic this, just hasn't been able to get there. But I think he is amazing, and he's great here. And as soon as he enters the scene I'm talking about, I guess I should talk about that first.
Go for it.
Because before I talk about
for those who haven't seen Pulp Fiction,
there's a scene where Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta, they enter this apartment with I guess a bunch of college kids. There's like 4 of them in this apartment, and they're trying to get something from them for their boss. And some pretty interesting and awesome stuff happens.
To say the least. Yeah.
And as soon as he enters, he's instantly a presence, and he understands the situation fully. And I think one of my favorite parts about that is he understands the situation to a degree that before they even enter the room, him and John Travolta are just outside in the hallway screwing around, just having what I think is pretty hilarious and compelling conversation. And it's like he's just so calm. It's just like another day to these guys. And the people on the inside of the apartment have no idea what's about to happen to them. And what happens, it will forever go down as one of the best scenes of all time, in my opinion. I mean, I think he takes their nervousness and their fright, absolutely uses it against them, and it becomes the most endlessly quotable scene, at least of Sam Jackson's
At least,
career.
yeah, definitely up there. Believe it or not, probably not even my personal favorite Samuel L. Jackson character, but up there. I've always loved his role in Jackie Brown for some reason. I think Ordo Roby's fantastic, but I mean, you can't deny the classic of this character, though. I mean,
It's amazing.
It is phenomenal, really is.
Yeah. All right, Neil, what do you got at number 2?
Number 2 is a rope and 2 men in a dark room. It is Casino Royale. And
yeah.
Daniel Craig's interrogation scene with Mads Mikkelsen, and this rope isn't just any old flimsy rope. It's one of those big, thick ropes that you used to get in gym class that you used to try and climb up to the top with. And he has some unconventional techniques of torturing Daniel Craig, whipping him between the legs with a really sturdy rope. And
man.
One of my favorite quotes from that scene is, "Now the whole world will know you died scratching my balls."
It is great. I actually rewatched this in preparation for the show today, and I could barely get through it.
It's painful for us men who value that part.
It's hard to watch. Yes, very good stuff.
That's a good honorable mention for me. I will say that one.
Same here. Yeah, very good honorable mention. All right, Brendan, what do you got?
So interestingly, my number 2 does involve that body part again, but it's a movie. I don't know if you guys have ever seen. It's a movie that came out only a few years ago, and it won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. It's called The Secret in Their Eyes. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, but there's an interrogation scene that happens where essentially what the movie's about is an unsolved case, and basically the two people that are trying to solve it are kind of like a romantic couple or whatever like that. But it's a rape and murder case, and it's a very visceral kind of ugly kind of case. But they bring someone in who they suspect who the killer is, and he's very quiet, very kept to himself, but very scared. But the woman comes in and provokes him by basically kind of degrading him, saying you know nothing, like you're not a man, you know nothing about what a woman wants. And all of a sudden this breaks the guy down so much to the point that he tries to take advantage of her in the interrogation room. He actually whips out his junk in one scene. But what she does to provoke that response out of him, because he's so conniving and so quiet though, but how she's able to break him down in that scene is so compelling, and it made me just love her character even more, because what ends up happening after the movie and what they do, the corrupt way that they treat this character who is the suspected killer, it goes in so many different directions. I can't really say any more without spoiling it, but I'll end by saying if you haven't seen this movie, it won Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars that year for the right reason. It is a fantastic mystery, romance, crime movie. Definitely go check it out.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I'll have to catch up on it.
It definitely. If you
it's awesome. It's pretty awesome.
We got someone that agrees.
There you go. That's 2 votes for yes. So
yes.
I'll definitely go check
Absolutely.
it out. For my number 2, I'm picking it for a couple different reasons. 1, I love it, and 2, it's going to piss Brendan off. So that's good enough for me. And my number 2 is The Usual Suspects, and it's kind of hard to talk about this one without giving major spoilers away for those that haven't seen it. But I'll just say that Kevin Spacey is awesome, and he is the master of interrogations. And the whole film is obviously based on this interrogation, if you've seen it. So it's obviously a big pivotal piece. And the way that he uses the room and the space that he is given is pretty genius. And he uses a lot of intricate details that, again, I won't spoil, but I think is pretty awesome. And the way that he just kind of toys with the interrogators there. And his performance is crucial. And, we talked about this quite a bit some odd extra films ago, Brennan. But for me, his performance is key in why that movie works or doesn't work, I think. I mean, if you fully buy into it, what happens at the end, I think, is amazing, and it absolutely works. At least it did for me. Maybe not for some other people, but we'll forgive you, Brendan. And it's one of my favorite endings to any film, especially in the last 20 years. So,
I will say again, I really don't like this movie at all.
And you're wrong, and we can forgive you. It's okay. All right, Neil, what do you think about The Usual Suspects? Yes or no?
I absolutely love it. The first time I watched it, it was absolutely brilliant. But once you know the initial conceit,
sure,
okay, it's great. It's a great tour de force of acting and everything else that goes with it, and it's a wonderful story. But once that central bit of knowledge that you've got by the end of watching it the first time is gone, it sort of detracts from it. And
sure.
and don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful movie, but that plot point is so key to the enjoyment.
Yeah.
That once that's gone, it sort of becomes an average movie. Dare I say? So I'm playing Switzerland here, guys. I'm standing between both of you. Okay.
He's playing it safe.
But even from a first time watch, it's amazing. Anyway,
yeah,
we could talk.
No.
We could debate this all day long.
No.
Neil, what is your number one?
It is another Tarantino film. Not that one. No, actually, it's not. It's a Tony Scott film, and it's got Tarantino's hands all over it. It's True Romance.
Oh yes.
You're getting angry, asking the same question a second time. Where did they go?
They didn't tell me. Now, you just wait a minute and listen to me. I haven't seen Clarence in 3 years. He shows up yesterday with a young girl, saying that he got married. He asked for some quick cash to go on a honeymoon. He asked me if he could borrow $500. I felt like helping him, so I wrote him out a check. We went to breakfast in the morning, and that's the last I saw of him. So help me God. They never thought to tell me where they were going, and I never thought to ask.
The infamous Christopher Walken as a mafioso boss, trying to track down Dennis Hopper's being interrogated to give up the whereabouts of his daughter and her lover. And he tells a very interesting story about how the mafia was spawned from guys from Africa. I think that's the most polite way of putting it.
Yeah, sure.
And it is a very much in your face, screw you sort of moment where he's consigned to defeat already. He's looking at he knows the game is up. He knows that these guys are going to do something to him, and so Walken lulls him into a false sense of security, sticks a cigarette in his mouth, lights it up, lets him chill out a bit, and then, as I said, in the face of most animosity, he tells this story about how the Sicilians were spawned. And for me, that is one of the most tense moments I've ever sat in a room. I was too young to see it when it came out in '93, but in a room of people, that was the most intense moment I've ever had in a brutal interrogation scene, because what they do to him afterwards, I don't think we can actually talk about on air, but it is a horrible scene.
No, I agree. It's absolutely mesmerizing, and Christopher Walken's reaction to the end of that scene is incredible. so good. That's a really, really good honorable mention. I highly considered it for my top three.
Yeah, sure. that was almost an honorable mention for me. The only reason why I really didn't consider it, because it's been so long since I've seen the movie. I'm not fresh on it again. I'd have to rewatch it. It's been way too long, but I remember I really enjoyed it though.
All right, Brennan, number one. What do you got, man?
So number one, I'm going back to a film. I don't know. It's not quite as well known, I guess, as it should be. I think it did come up in one of our Twitter responses for this. But the movie came out in 1976. It's called Marathon Man.
Strength is often inherited. He died in your arms. He traveled far and in great pain to do that. There has to be a reason.
I don't know anything.
Carl!
Oh, please don't worry. I'm not going into that cavity again. That nerve's already dying. A live, freshly cut nerve is infinitely more sensitive.
So, I'll just drill into a healthy tooth until I reach the pulp. Unless, of course, you can tell me that it's safe.
Starring Dustin Hoffman and Sir Laurence Olivier, Roy Schneider. But the scene I'm talking about specifically, basically the story is about how this graduate student, history graduate student, gets kind of involved in this government conspiracy of stolen diamonds, and this character played by Sir Laurence Olivier he's essentially a dentist, and he's in the way that he uses his dentist tools and what he knows about dentistry to interrogate Dustin Hoffman's character.
Sure.
Is is so painful to sit through. I remember when my dad made me watch this movie because he's a big fan of it, and the first time I saw it was a couple years ago.
Sure.
He said when he went to the theater to see it, and that interrogation scene happened, the first time it happens, the guy sitting in front of him passed out in the theater.
Really?
Yeah. And I thought that was just,
wow.
But I can really see why, and the performance that Sir Laurence Olivier gives here, and then, is it safe? Is it safe? It is so frightening. I think one of the most underrated, like frightening supporting characters, I think. And it's just so well done, and it still holds up. It's still hard to watch. It really is.
No, it's a really great scene. Like I said, it's a good honorable mention. I highly considered it. The biggest reason I didn't want to pick it, especially I didn't want to pick it at number one, because one, I didn't want to go find a movie clip for it. So screw you, Brendan, for that.
You're welcome.
Because two, I just had a bunch of dental work done this last spring, and man, that kind of stuff can be incredibly painful. I mean, it was at one point, like before my wedding in May, I was probably taking like 12 ibuprofen a day because that stuff is it's incredibly painful, or at least it can be. And so to see him do what he does in this scene is torturous.
I agree. I agree.
It's incredible. Yeah. Very good stuff, guys. For my number one, I'm going with probably a little bit of a cliched pick, and I don't care.
Hey, sometimes it's cliched for a reason because it's good.
Yeah, it's very good. And I'm going with one that's kind of recent as well. And I'm going with the Joker from The Dark Knight.
Never start with the head. The victim gets all fuzzy. He can't feel the neck. See?
You wanted me. Here I am.
I wanted to see what you'd do. And you didn't disappoint. You let 5 people die. Then you let Dent take your place. Even to a guy like me, that's cold.
Where's Dent?
Those mob fools want you gone so they can get back to the way things were. But I know the truth. There's no going back. You've changed things. Forever.
Then why do you want to kill me?
I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? Go back to ripping off mob dealers? No. You complete me.
You're garbage. Who kills for money?
Don't talk like one of them. You're not.
Everyone's seen this by now, I would think, right? I mean, do I really need to set this up?
I have no idea what movie this is.
Obviously, there's a really great interrogation scene where Batman is interrogating the Joker, and this is one of my favorite Christopher Nolan scenes. I think this is him at his best. And not only that, but I think when Batman and the Joker are together in the same scene in this film, that's when this film is at its best. And it's really neat because Batman is kind of playing the bad cop here and is beating the Joker physically, but at the same time, the Joker is beating Batman psychologically, and so you really don't know who has the upper hand in this scene, and you almost get the sense that Batman, he knows that he's on the losing end here. He becomes very angry. Like I said, he's getting really physical and getting a little bit desperate at the same time, and the Joker is being the Joker, and he's just laughing and just playing this scene so sadistically and amazing all at the same time, and the dance between them is just riveting. I loved it. It's easily my favorite part of that film, and even where it goes from there is incredible. But that scene for sure is the one that sticks out for me as far as my best interrogation.
Yeah,
it's a good shout.
It's a great pick. No matter, I mean, like I said, sometimes it's cliched for a reason because it's good, and in this case, it's good. Definitely one of the best scenes in the movie. I think really the only reason why I didn't pick it on my top 3 is because I knew someone here was going to have it. I knew, but the thing is, it is one of the best interrogation scenes in any movie. It really is.
And I'm glad that I did, because even if I didn't, and since you guys didn't have it on your list, I probably would have made it up and went with it anyway.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to hear from people on the internet. What about the Joker in The Dark Knight?
So it had to be represented somewhere.
I got it covered.
So thank you for that. Yeah. So now that just increased our credibility. But it really is a great scene. I do think it's also one of the best. I think it's one of the best scenes Nolan has directed. That really is when he was at the peak of his powers. Yeah.
All right, Neil. Any honorable mentions?
Well, I think the other cliched one that no one's mentioned, that I'm very surprised that no one's mentioned, is a song that ruined the Steelers Wheel classic song. It's Reservoir Dogs.
Yep.
And Mr. Blonde's interrogation scene / torture scene.
Yeah. I thought about doing it as a tie, like Pulp Fiction / Reservoir Dogs.
For the Tarantino tie.
Yeah, it was like, we'll just do Pulp Fiction. It's a very good one.
Because it is better.
Great,
at least I think it's better, yeah.
Anything else, Neil, as far as your
No, that was it in terms of torture. But yeah, good shout on the Batman one, because I mean, it's obviously one that comes to mind in recent times. But to take a fictional character and not make it a caricature of itself, you know, that's a really intense and sort of brutal scene, because of the Joker's reaction, and Batman's getting incredibly frustrated and repeatedly beating on him. And it's a moment where Batman sort of loses his cool and his credibility, but it's not played down at all. It's not played at the lowest common denominator. It's actually quite an cerebral, intense scene. I would argue that some films based on real life torture don't even match the amount of brutality that's in that scene.
I completely agree.
Good shout.
Yeah, I agree.
Any honorable mentions for you, Brendan?
So I also said, you know, the Joker from The Dark Knight as well as Casino Royale. Those are definitely honorable mentions.
Yes.
I said that earlier. But aside from that, I also had the the waterboarding torture from Zero Dark 30. I think is a huge, very important one too.
I almost picked it.
Very controversial one too. Yeah, and I know you were a fan of the movie, JD. So I figured it was going to be an honorable mention at least. There's also the ending interrogation in Brazil. Is also one worth talking about.
Dude, you're just stealing my list. Are you just reading it off my list?
Maybe. Well, let's see if you have these. Also, the interrogation between Agent Smith and Neo in the first Matrix.
No. I didn't have that.
I thought that was neat. What good is a phone if you can't speak?
Sure.
I thought that was a nice topper to that. And I also had I didn't really. This one I almost did include, but I didn't really include it because I had trouble arguing if it really was an interrogation scene, and that's the scene towards the end in the car of Seven, where they're discussing, where Kevin Spacey's role as John Doe is kind of discussing his methods to Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. But it didn't really feel like an interrogation scene, I guess, even though you can argue that it was. But there are a lot of other, using the term loosely, interrogation scenes in the movie Seven that I almost wanted to include. I mean, I actually love the scene where they bring the guy in that was forced to have sex with the woman with that knife condom that was designed, and his hysteria and freak out during that was so compelling and brilliant and frightening. I almost included that too, but there's a lot of scenes from Seven just to make that an honorable mention in general.
No, very good stuff. As far as my honorable mentions, you pretty much mentioned them all, or most of them. Zero Dark 30, Reservoir Dogs, Brazil, Casino Royale, Marathon Man. You guys talked about a few other ones. I had was Mission Impossible 3, which is arguably maybe my favorite of that franchise. I also had Hard Candy, which is a really good one as well.
Forgot about that one.
I also had the Hammer and Bullet interrogation in Drive. And for the hell of it, the fun, didn't consider this at all, but I just threw it on honorable mentions, but the fun little interrogation of Black Widow in the Avengers. Just because it's fun.
Okay, yeah, it's worth mentioning. Yeah.
I didn't highly consider it at all, but just for the heck of it. But anyway, that's all I had on my honorable mentions list.
All right, well, everyone out there, let us know how your picks stack up against ours. You can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com, or leave us a comment on Facebook or on Twitter, or even on our website at InSessionFilm.com. All right, so in honor of our top 3 discussion today, we also threw out the question to some of our fans on Twitter what some of their favorite interrogation scenes are, and we got some really good ones, and we're going to read through them a little bit right now. So, starting off, the Vern's Video Vortex also mentioned Hard Candy, and I know you had that as one of your honorable mentions, JD. Basically, it said specifically any scene where Ellen Page interrogates Patrick Wilson. Phenomenal movie.
Yes,
I can't believe I forgot about that one. Also goes on to mention Death and the Maiden, the Roman Polanski film, which I have not seen, but I have read the play by Ariel Dorfman.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either.
And it's a very good play. But it's cool. Says cool film with Sir Ben Kingsley getting interrogated by Sigourney Weaver. He does a lot through feminism and things like that. Also mentions Swimming with Sharks, Frank Willie getting revenge on his boss from hell, played by Kevin Spacey. Another film I haven't seen, but you should probably go check it out. Continuing on, Mr. DJ Valentine goes on to mention Man on Fire. I guess the scene under the bridge. I haven't seen that movie in a while, but it's another
been a while,
very good pick. Batman, the Joker, and the Dark Knight, classic pick. Hans Gruber and Takagi in Die Hard, another great pick. And
that's a very good one.
Very explosive ending. I can't believe I forgot about that one too.
Yeah.
Mr. Blonde and Reservoir Dogs, obviously. And also goes on to mention the Goldfinger laser table in James Bond. Also Javier Bardem in Bond and Skyfall. A lot of Bonds one, we didn't think about James
those,
Bond. So thank you, DJ, for those recommendations, because then it shows how stupid we are.
And how much Bond gets tortured.
Yeah, that's true. We only had we talked about Casino Royale. We didn't even think about that. Like how stupid we are. So thank you for that. Okay, continuing on. Instagrants 2 goes on to mention Marathon Man, my personal favorite. It's a good choice right there. It also mentions Mission Impossible 3, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Tom Cruise.
Philip Seymour Hoffman is amazing. Whether you like the film or maybe you're on the fence with it, I think he's incredible.
I think he's incredible for what he had to do. I still think it's probably my least favorite of the Mission Impossible movies, though. It's not bad at all. I don't think any of them have been bad, but I mean, I think I'm in the minority in that one. I'm not sure. Most people hate the second one the most.
Yeah, that's where I'm with that.
And I could see why. But continuing on though, Sunflower JD also mentions the Dark Knight with Batman and the Joker. I mean, that is a great pivotal scene. Yeah, you have to mention it. Yep. No totally mentions Guy Pearce's masterful intercom work in L.A. Confidential. Yeah. Another film I forgot. I got to watch that movie again. That is a fantastic movie.
That's solid. Yeah,
love it.
Yeah.
Mark Herney goes on to mention Zero Dark 30. Another great honorable mention for us. Dago Waffles also mentions Batman. And Ouija Film Blog talks about Casino Royale, and the parts of me ache just thinking about it, which we did allude to. But it's worth talking about because it is a bit of a painful scene to watch, but it works, and it works for the right reasons.
Absolutely, And thanks everyone that commented either on Facebook or Twitter. We even got some comments on Google Plus as well. So we got a ton of responses. So thanks to everyone that responded to us.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about this week's poll.
It's real bad. Okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll? Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right, for our poll question this week, since we discussed Whiplash on our latest extra film, this is where we got the inspiration for it. The question that we threw out there was, which music movie since the year 2000 do you prefer? And the choices that we threw out there was Almost Famous, Ray, Once, School of Rock, Pitch Perfect, Walk the Line, Inside Llewyn Davis, August Rush, or Other. So you could just write in whatever you wanted. Before I give away the poll results, though, I'll toss it to you first, Neil. What would your answer be for this poll question?
Out of the list you gave, I think Once and Walk the Line would tie for me, but they're probably not my favourite music-orientated movies of the last, since 2000 anyway. One of my favourite films, it stars a real-life pop star. It stars Bjork and Catherine Deneuve, and it is Lars von Trier's Dancer in the Dark.
Great choice.
Which is just a wave of music all the way through, and you're carried, and it's people slate von Trier for all his controversial pieces of work, but Dancer in the Dark is one of the most beautiful films you will ever see in a long time, and the music and Bjork is a very unique individual, shall we say, but the way her story carries her along and the way she reacts to it as a not a classically trained actress, she's fantastic. And there's a track on there featuring Tom York from Radiohead, and it was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Song that year. It was called I've Seen It All, and it's great. So that would be my pick, would be Dancer in the Dark from 2000 by Lars von Trier.
Which is why we leave the write-in option for great choices like that.
Exactly.
All right, what about you, Brendan?
Mine, as you know, I'm a huge fan of Once, and Once would have been my pick on that one. I love that movie. I could watch that over and over again. Once would be my pick.
Well, for me, I would go with the one that actually won the poll, and I would go with Almost Famous. Is one of my favorite movies of the 2000s for sure. I absolutely love this film, and it did win the poll, as I mentioned, with 23% of the vote. And in second place, a little surprising, I guess, considering how much I feel like you've talked about some of these other ones, Brendan. But Inside Llewyn Davis got second with 20% of the vote. And in third place was Once at 17%. And actually very few votes for Pitch Perfect, which I was kind of a little surprised by, I'll say. But
yeah,
we did have a few write-in options for Across the Universe and 24-Hour Party People as well. So there you go.
Yeah. I guess like, and then I think my argument there was that I guess Across the Universe really is a musical, and we were trying to limit it away from that one. So, but regardless, it is a pretty interesting. It is a fair pick though.
And for next week's poll question, as we are anticipating Foxcatcher, which I'm sure, hopefully, we'll get here in a few weeks. So for the poll question next week, we're going to be asking what is the best dramatic performance by a comedian. So be sure to be on the lookout for that next week.
Ooh. All right, well, coming up next, we're going to be doing our segment called This or That, and we're going to be discussing some pretty fun and maybe pretty frightening hypothetical movie scenarios. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, I just want to pause for a second to say a huge thank you to those that are supporting the show. If you want to help support us, there's a couple ways you can do that. One, you can go check out our latest bonus content on our website. They actually are free to listen to, but we do encourage and appreciate a small donation of 99 cents. And our latest bonus content, we talked about Interstellar in spoilers. I know it's a very polarizing film, but we had some really great conversation that I would highly recommend you checking out. And also, you can check out our InSession Film store. You can get an InSession Film t-shirt or mug. There's a whole bunch of things on there that we know you enjoy. If there's something that you would rather have, let us know. We would definitely put the logo on it and definitely send it your way. So definitely hit us up. And as mentioned up at the top of the show, we are sponsored by audibletrial.com, which is a great resource if you're very busy like me and audiobooks are the way to go for you. I would highly recommend Audible. They have a ton of stuff, a huge variety of books that you will absolutely love. If you go to audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm, you'll get a free audiobook and a free 30-day trial just for signing up, and it helps support us in tremendous ways as well. So either way, no matter what you do, even a subscription to iTunes is a big way to help support us. And no matter what you do, we really do appreciate it.
Hi, this is Greg.
This is Chuck.
And this is Dan. And we are Talking in Circles. Because the world needs another podcast, we are here as Geekcast Radio's newest edition.
And as the title says, each week we get lost in conversation about a wide range of topics, including movies, comics, games, art, TV, and even occasionally sports.
We play games and discuss pivotal topics like who would win in a fight, the Kool-Aid Man or Tony the Tiger, and examine the hot-button issues of the world of geekdom.
We keep things fresh by taking timeless topics in new directions. We are simply three friends having a fun time talking about life's most fascinating foibles.
Stay connected with us every Tuesday on iTunes or at geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 91, and we're going to be starting a new segment, as Brendan just alluded to, that we're going to call This or That.
So, Cal, would you rather electrocute yourself, or would you rather electrocute Amy? The blue button is for you. Press the red button if you'd rather zap Amy.
All right, guys, for this segment, what we're going to be doing is, this is going to work very similar to the game Would You Rather, if you guys have ever played that, where we're going to toss out some hypothetical situations, and we're just going to discuss which one we would choose. And I will reiterate, these are hypotheticals, so please no angry emails or think that we are taking anything out of context. We are making
or that we
these
want
up.
Any of these movies to actually be bad.
Yeah, these situations may never, ever happen. It may not be on anyone's radar at all. It's all for fun.
Yep.
So let's start with one that I thought was pretty interesting, since Marvel has been going a little bit crazy with these announcements over the last month. They've obviously talked about Civil War. There's been talk about Spider-Man possibly joining the MMU. So for this first one, we're going to say, would you guys rather take the Civil War movies without Spider-Man in them? Okay, so Spider-Man not joining the MMU at all. Or would you rather not have the Civil War movies at all, which is a pretty interesting story in the Marvel Comics, but Spider-Man gets to join the MMU? Which one would you rather have? Neil, we'll toss it to you first.
I'd rather not have Spidey in there at all. Mainly because I've been so used to him being such a standalone character. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the story. Do you want to fill me in?
Yeah, essentially what happens is, and they're going to set this up in Age of Ultron, but what happens in the comics is that because of an event that happens, they basically do, like, similar to X-Men where they have like the Registration Act. There's like the superhero Registration Act that is on the table for Congress, and Iron Man is for it and Captain America is fully against it. And it pretty much becomes, as the term is, it becomes a civil war where some superheroes join up with Captain America and some with Iron Man, and becomes this big all-out adventure as to who is right, and there's some awesome fights that happen in the middle of it. And Spider-Man actually plays a crucial role in that storyline, which is what makes this Would You Rather pretty compelling.
Right.
So that's essentially the story.
Well, in which case then I would rather see Spider-Man in there. If he is instrumental within the Civil War storyline, then yeah, and bring him back into the fold. Now I'm not sure where do the rights sit with Spider-Man films at the moment if this was to be a reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess my vote on, I think you asked me this one earlier, JD, I gave you an answer before, and I still stick by it. I'd rather not have Spider-Man in these films, and I'm kind of judging it just on the films that we've been getting thus far. I understand that Spider-Man has a very integral role within this Civil War context, at least, from the comics and the original stories, but I think the trend that we've seen the Spider-Man movies kind of go with what Sony's been doing, I feel like at this point it would just seem kind of forced. And having said that, I think with the Civil War story already intertwined with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and how we already know who these characters are, and we've gotten to know them for movies going on already for the last couple of years since 2008.
Sure.
I think we just from a film going dramatic standpoint, I think we need to stick with those characters. So I'd rather keep Civil War without Spider-Man.
Well, I think the thing with the Civil War storyline is it's going to introduce characters, or there will be characters that are introduced in that storyline that haven't been in the MMU yet. Like, so we'll get Black Panther. Yeah. We're going to get some of these other ones that will eventually be a part of that. So if they do it correctly, and here's the thing, I'm fully confident that if Marvel was to get Spider-Man and they could introduce him into this storyline, I think that they could do it in a way that it would work. I mean, they haven't really done a whole lot that has steered me wrong so far.
Sure.
So I think they would be able to bring him in. I don't think that they would necessarily have to do an origin story. They could just kind of plop him into the middle of this.
Yeah.
And I would be fully confident in that. But I think what makes this situation compelling is the sense that you have Spider-Man in a storyline that is really amazing. But for the sake of the game, we're discussing whether we would have Civil War without Spider-Man, or would we rather have him just join what they're already doing. And that's tough for me because I want both.
That's the point of this, though. I mean,
that is the point of the game. So for the sake of the game, I would rather go without the Civil War storyline, and I'd rather see Spider-Man with these characters, because I think no matter the story, I think Marvel could come up with a pretty fun story, and I would rather see Spider-Man interact with Iron Man and interact with these characters that we've seen in other cartoons and comics, if you've read any of that. And I think just based on what we've seen on screen in these films, I think they would be able to do something new and fresh with Spider-Man in an already interesting world with already interesting characters. And I would rather see that. As much as I love the Civil War storyline, or I love the idea and where they're going to go with it, I just want to see Spider-Man in this universe. I think they would be able to handle it in a much better way than we've seen it with Sony as of late.
Are we assuming it'd still be Andrew Garfield in the role of Peter Parker?
Well, I mean, either way, I mean, obviously I would love Andrew Garfield to stay, but even if they find someone that can bring what he brought to the table with that character, I'd be okay with it, even if it was a different actor. Although, obviously, in an ideal world, I would love Andrew Garfield.
Yeah, but this isn't an ideal world.
Yeah, it never is. But pretty interesting anyway. All right, let's move on to the next This or That. So this next one is a fun little one that Neil sent to me earlier this week. So this is quite interesting. Would you rather see a Michael Bay remake of Police Academy with Seth Rogen and Amy Poehler, or Spielberg reboot Jaws with Jason Statham as Brody? That's quite an interesting one.
We should have more fun with this. You picked the most generic one. This is awesome. This is.
Look, I think those first two are pretty compelling, but this one is really great. Neil, is your?
It is not out of the realms of possibility. look at Pain and Gain.
Exactly.
With,
yeah.
You know, The Rock Johnson. And that's a comedy to an extent, and I could do with a bit of Bay action in there, and we can, you know,
sure.
So I'm guessing you would pick Bay out of this scenario.
Well, no, I am absolutely split between the two, because I think Jason Statham would be quite a gritty Brody. You know, he can do Family Man. He can do Concerned Gentleman at a Beach. We've seen all this, and I would. Do you know what I would ask about the reboot of Spielberg's Jaws with Statham was who would play Quint? Now that would be the interesting one.
Yeah.
But no, I think the Jaws is due a reboot, and I'd like to see Spielberg reboot it himself. So I'll go for the Statham on this one.
You know, that's an interesting point, because in today's Hollywood, it's reboots and remakes and sequels, and that's what we get. So if we're going to get it, at least let Spielberg reboot.
Yeah, well, I've always kind of felt that way, too, that if we're going to get that kind of reboot, how about the person that originally did it, who recognizes the fact that maybe we're due for a reboot, maybe because something doesn't hold up anymore, take advantage to recreate your own vision in a more modern way that's timeless.
CGI shark this time?
Oh, yeah, no, I don't want to do that, but my pick would be the same thing, and mainly because we would still have Spielberg attached to that project, and that's where my faith in it would be the reason why I'd be still either excited for it, or I think that would have the best chance of still being good. Not to say that I think Michael Bay remaking Police Academy with Amy Poehler and Seth Rogen does sound pretty awesome, but I would personally rather, as the game suggests, I would rather have a Jaws reboot with Spielberg himself. And I agree, you know, I like Jason Statham in most of what he does, at least for what he's good at. But I think he would make a pretty compelling Chief Brody in a different way, but in a pretty charismatic way, I guess.
Sure. In a little bit more of an accent.
Yeah.
No, I would agree with you guys. If I was gonna see a reboot of this, I would definitely want to see Spielberg's name attached to it. And if it was gonna be Jason Statham, yeah, I mean, sign me up. I would definitely be there. For the sake of the game, though, I would actually pick Michael Bay, and here's the reason why. Is because everyone has been doing nothing but bitching about him being attached to the Transformers series. And I've said on the show for the last God knows how long that I think he needs to get away from Transformers and do something else similar to kind of Pain and Gain, or this other film, I forget the name of it, that he's going to be doing now.
Yeah.
That I think that's where he needs to go. Get back to doing something where people can appreciate you a little bit more, because people are pretty much loathing him as a Transformers director. And I think in this sense, and I liked Pain and Gain. I was one of the people, I know it was a little bit of a polarizing film. I liked it quite a bit, actually. So to see him do a Police Academy remake, and I like Seth Rogen too, I like Amy Poehler, I think that would be interesting. It'd be interesting just to see those actors work with Michael Bay. That in itself is kind of an interesting concept, but yeah, give me something outside of Transformers with Michael Bay. If it's similar in terms of tone and style to Pain and Gain, will be there. So I think just for the interestingness of that, I would pick that one. But the Spielberg reboot I would definitely be there for that one.
Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah.
All right, for the last one we'll talk about is it was announced last week that Toy Story 4 is going to be here in 2017. I know, Brendan, you're truly excited for that.
Oh, yeah, you have no idea.
So when that film comes out, let's assume that Toy Story 4 is the best of all of them. I know that's hard to fathom, but let's just assume that. Would you rather take that, or would you rather let the trilogy stand on its own? Neil, what's up?
Let's go with the trilogy that stands on its own. Regardless, we can leave Toy Story as the greatest thing. Toy Story 4 is the greatest film out of all four of them, but the three itself, as a sequence of films, I don't think. I'd rather take that than one standalone film. So yeah, I'll go with the original trilogy on that one. It's never been a series of film that's ever connected with me on the level that it seems to with everyone else. Perhaps I was a little bit too old at the time to really sink my teeth into it. But as children's filmmaking and family filmmaking goes, I'd rather have three films actually for the running time than just one film I can watch over and over again and then get bored of. So we'll go with the three just due to running time, for that reason alone.
Okay.
I would agree for different reasons though, and mainly because I think the Toy Story trilogy is one of the best trilogies I've ever seen. I think it just and maybe unlike you, Neil, maybe I kind of grew up with those movies in many ways. I was the same age as Andy when that movie first came out. And
Are you calling me old?
Yes, I am. I'm calling you an old fart, ma'am. I'm calling you out. What are you going to do about it? But I was the same age as Andy when the first one came out, and subsequently, as each film came out, I felt like I kind of grew up with him. So when Toy Story 3 came out, I was in college, and he was just going off to college. So in many ways, it's a movie that was kind of almost about all of us that were growing up with him. I feel like, and it just kind of, it makes so much sense. I feel like that as a complete trilogy, it creates this thematic idea that just concludes and comes full circle by the end of it. Even the first, like you think about it this way, going even to the nitty gritty, the very opening shot of Toy Story 1 is is Andy's wallpaper of the clouds. Okay? The very last shot of Toy Story 3 is a shot of the sky with the clouds in that same pattern of the wallpaper. So in many ways, you argue the very first and last shot of the entire trilogy is the same. So it really does come full circle. I think adding more films to that just really detracts from that. So I would much rather have a trilogy that stands on its own. But, big but here, I would probably be willing to change my answer to saying I'd rather have a Toy Story 4 that is the best if, hypothetically, they're introducing Toy Story 4 as a caper for a new trilogy then. So let's say, hypothetically, Toy Stories 4, 5, and 6, maybe they'll call them something different. Maybe you can call those the Bonnie trilogy. So the Toys trilogy of adventures, them growing up with Bonnie, and then they actually have to learn new life lessons with her growing up then. Maybe there's some more room for growth there. Then I would be okay with moving towards that camp if we were assuming Toy Story 4 is meant to start maybe a sequel trilogy, if you will, that's not meant to be connected to the other trilogy.
Sure.
But I don't think they're going that route. I don't think that's their plan. I think it's just kind of a cash grab at this point. And it could be great. I don't know. But I would still much rather just have the complete trilogy as it is.
Well, see, I'll disagree with that. I actually do think it's going to be the start of a new trilogy.
Okay.
And I think a lot of the reasons why is because when you take the nature of this film, and while there can be a middle ground, when these films first came out, it really spoke to young kids and what their experience is, with toys as a young kid, obviously. But to the parents that went to see those, it was their toys as a kid that was featured in those films.
Right.
So it spoke to both the kid and the parents. And I think what they're going to do with Toy Story 4, and maybe why I'll pick it for the sake of the game, is that I think they're going to be redoing that. Essentially, we're going to have a new young kid that is going to be able to be the voice for kids of today's generation. But I think you're also going to see new toys along with some familiar ones that will speak to the parents of today. So I'm hoping that we get to see Ninja Turtles and maybe Transformers toys and things like that. Like, that's what I think they're going to do, is they're going to speak to a new set of parents, a new set of kids that is going to be amazing, especially since you're bringing back some of the same people that was with the original trilogy. And so I have full confidence that they're going to be able to be on that same level. Now, for the sake of the game, if we're just doing just Toy Story 4 on its own and is the best of all time, of those four anyway, I would be very much in that ballpark if they go that route. Now, it's obviously going to depending on what they do, because if they go different than what I just said, and it's not my generation of toys and all this, then it's not going to speak to me necessarily, because that trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies. I agree with you. The way that it culminates and comes full circle is just impeccable. It's perfect. I wouldn't have wanted to change it anyway. So the announcement of Toy Story 4, I agree with you. It's a little off-putting and a little bit at an arm's reach with that, but at the same time, I'm fully confident they're going to do something really cool and fresh with it.
And you make a really good point, JD, that I think one thing that I think they really could do with Toy Story 4, if they're going to maybe expand it to another trilogy, and this is something that the original Toy Story trilogy didn't really do. But not that's a knock towards it. Wasn't supposed to do this. That's to maybe incorporate. Well, the idea is that now, those of us who were young growing up with the Toy Story trilogy, we could potentially be parents now when Toy Story 4 comes out. So maybe you could start making the adults central characters in these movies then, because in many ways, Toy Story 3, Andy's mom is really when she started becoming more of a character within the movie.
Sure.
So maybe what if Bonnie's mom becomes maybe an important character within these movies? Make the parents somehow involved so that it has maybe more of an older nostalgia that still carries over with these movies, because essentially nostalgia is really the central theme of these entire movies. And maybe that's something they could do. So there's a lot of good what ifs that they could do to make this a great next step of movies. I just think that it is off-putting is really what is the best way you said it, is that because this trilogy really is full circle already, and I'd love it to just stay as it is.
Neil, anything to add to that?
Well, I was going to say the good thing, I guess, for both of you guys who are really obviously quite excited about this prospect of Toy Story 4 is that Lasseter's attached to it, you know? So, you know, it could have been someone else. But it's good that, you know, he's at the helm of taking the sequel forward. But the one thing I wanted to say is both of you talk about rebooting with the same characters, with the same things going on. Surely, you know, we're not making any progress here. Would it not be better to bring new ideas? You're both obviously very nostalgic about it, and that comes across.
Sure.
But this rebooting and going through the same motions again, I mean, does that have any cultural relevance? Would you not prefer for it to go off on a tangent? Perhaps we should have a prequel. I would love to have a prequel. You know, we could have a plastics factory in China and putting together these toys, and that would be
the birth of them.
Political comment. The very first Pixar film inside a Chinese factory.
That almost seems like it would scare kids.
I know. That's an interesting idea.
It's like, how did these toys become alive?
Yeah. I will say, while it maybe thematically it's going to be kind of the same, I think that theme can carry itself in new and refreshing ways. It really depends on how they do it, but I do think that today's generation, especially 2017, that'll be 22 years post the first Toy Story.
Sure.
A lot of things have changed, and I think speaking to today's younger generation, and then speaking to, like you were saying, a new set of parents with a new set of toys and new characters, I think it'll almost feel like its own new trilogy, even though thematically and it's kind of familiar. I think it separate itself enough to be a good trilogy.
Yeah, and I think it also is a pretty good point to say, like, when we talked about the other this or that with Spielberg rebooting his own film of Jaws. So now we have Lasseter kind of back at the director's helm. I think we also have to make note that he's also at the helm for Cars 3.
Which we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, there's a lot more we can discuss with this, but that will do it for this or that this week. But fun conversation, though. Very good.
I agree. I mean, let's get everyone else involved. So let us know if you agree or disagree with our takes on this or that and some of these awesome discussions that we just had. You can leave us a comment on Facebook or Twitter, or email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com. But either way, we'd love to hear some of your thoughts out there, ladies and gentlemen.
Absolutely. Before we get out of here, though, for this week's show, Neil, thanks so much for joining us on the show this week, man.
Thanks, guys, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure and an honor, as always.
Absolutely. Once again, where can we find your awesomeness on the internet?
Currently, my website's undergoing a big change at the moment, but clickreadtype.com is my website. Or you can just throw abuse at me on Twitter. I occasionally talk film, so JD does it occasionally, and we disagree and everything else. But I'm at Neil Ramjee on Twitter.
Yeah, definitely go follow him. In all seriousness, is sometimes we do get in some fun disagreements, but he's a great follow. You'll get into some great conversation. I can only highly recommend him. Yeah, Neil, great having you on the show. And that should do it for this week's show. Be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/InSessionFilm. You can follow us on Twitter at InSession Film and on Google Plus as well. And on YouTube, just search InSession Film. And sign up for our monthly newsletter. You can do that on Facebook by clicking the newsletter tab or on our site at InSessionFilm.com/newsletter.
And for more thoughts on the films that we watch, you can check us out on Letterboxd by going to letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. And we also try to respond to every piece of email that we get, so you can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and on Stitcher. And while you're on iTunes, you can leave us a review and a comment there. We'd appreciate some feedback on that medium as well. Also, you can also check us out at Listen Now, at our Listen Now page, which is at InSessionFilm.com/listen-now.
And the InSession Film Podcast is supported by our super awesome listeners like you. Once again, if you want to help us, just go to our website at InSessionFilm.com and click on our bonus content tab in our main menu to hear our bonus content for just a small donation of 99 cents. And our latest bonus content is up where we discuss Interstellar and some fun spoiler territory. If you loved Interstellar, maybe skip that one, go to the next one. But that's one way you can help us out. You can also check out the InSession Film store or just go to InSessionFilm.com/donate and you'll see a bunch of information there on how you can help us out. One thing that you can do that I would highly recommend is checking out our mobile app for just a one-time fee of $1.99. You can find the app on the Amazon Market for Android devices, the Windows 8 phone store for Windows devices, the Podcast Box app for iOS devices, and all those details are on the site at InSessionFilm.com/apps. And next week on the show, we're going to be discussing The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, so I'm pretty curious to check that one out. And for our top 3, we're going to be discussing our top 3 trilogy characters, which I think will be pretty interesting as well. But before we get out of here, Neil, any final thoughts on anything before we leave today?
I actually want to tell folks to go and see a few films that are coming out this week. So,
okay.
I'd like to recommend Camp X-Ray. I believe it's on some on-demand services, and that's one that's really struck me recently. I didn't think much of it going in, but tying into the political torture of individuals, that's one on the flip side. And Camp X-Ray would be one that if you're thinking about watching it, go and watch it.
Yeah, I saw that one on VOD here. And this is a Kristen Stewart film. I'm just throwing that out there. But she's actually, I think, pretty good in this film. I would echo your thoughts, Neil.
Awesome.
So, final thoughts for me. I want to say something. And first off, let me apologize to my family that I'm going to bring this up like this. But I convinced them to go see the movie Whiplash.
Oh, yeah.
They drove, like, I forget exactly. No, it was local. They actually came to a local theater near where I'm from. So thank God for that. They didn't have to drive very far for it. But they all went to see it together, my parents and my sister. And even though they all loved it, I can't help but feel that my sister and mom just didn't quite get it correctly.
That's disappointing.
Because my sister texted me saying, "Oh my God, Whiplash was fantastic. It was such a sad tale. All he wanted was his approval." I was like, No, you did not know. And then my mom texted me. He's like, "Oh, it was so good. I almost cried during that scene." I was like, No. So
God bless their hearts.
I know. So if they listen to this show and they hear me say that, I'm sorry. I'm not meaning to make fun of you guys or anything like that. But I just wanted to mention that. I'm glad they liked the movie, though. I'm glad they enjoyed the movie because it's still probably my favorite movie of the year so far. And depending on what else comes out, it might even hold that spot. It's phenomenal. It really is.
Yeah,
so I'm glad they enjoyed it, even though they probably didn't enjoy it properly.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys get a chance to see Whiplash or Birdman, if it's playing in your area, I couldn't recommend both enough. I really love them. As far as final thoughts from me, one other thing to note is hopefully Blake will be back on the show kind of soon. He is doing better, just as an announcement, but definitely keep him in your thoughts and prayers as his family situation is still kind of not great, but
sure.
He himself though is doing a little bit better.
That's
so hopefully we'll get him back on the show kind of soon.
Absolutely.
As for this week's extra film, not really sure. We're still trying to figure that one out. I feel like we're saying that
I might not even be available, just to let you know, because I'm going to be actually doing the move then. So But we'll talk.
Yeah.
We'll see if
we'll figure that out.
Maybe I can, call him while I'm driving or something like that. It'll be like a business call.
Business call. Either way, go see The Hunger Games next week and join us for episode 92 on the show next week. Neil, thanks once again for joining us this week, man.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you guys next week on the InSession Film Podcast. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to episode 91 for November 16th, 2014, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Thanks for...
What?
That was just so distracting to me.
What?
Because it sounded so weird.
Who, me?
Yeah. It's like,
my voice is that deep?
Yeah, I was like, that's not Brendan. I was like, that's what I was thinking as I was trying to get
Can I behave even worse now? Like, and I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Back to seriousness. Okay. All right, for real. For real this time.
Give us a couple minutes.
Yeah.
JD, are you sure you're the one that's not been having the beers?
I know. Maybe I have.
It's funny. I didn't even have any beer last night. It was the cigars and like the White Russians.
Nice. For the entire version of our podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or on Stitcher, or check us out online at InSessionFilm.com.